Hi! Welcome to DnDTime Talks, the show where we discuss all things Dungeons and Dragons. I'm Pete.
I'm Jeremy. Pete, how
Great
are
snap,
you?
Jeremy. Great snap.
Yeah, well, it was not. You know what? It wasn't a great snap, Pete. But you know what? I'm okay with that.
I thought it was. I thought it was good. Well, I
I'm
mean, I
all
guess
right.
the sound
I'm all
quality.
right with that, Pete. I'm all right with that without having done the snap.
I mean, I guess the sound quality was okay, but I thought just the whole aesthetic and really the whole big picture of that snap, the action, I thought was good.
The
To answer your question, I'm great.
That's
And
wonderful.
I hope chat is also great. I see Bionic Shiva, I see Wild Ricochet, I see Mr. Plunderloot hanging out. Hello. Hey yo to you, Mr. Plunderloot. Rumor has it that you're going to be playing on Friday.
Rumor does have precisely that. But we'll talk more about Friday in a little bit, because right now we're going to be talking about downtime in naval or seafaring adventures.
Delightful.
What a segue. There are no segues in the sea. Did you know that, Pete?
Well, not unless you bring them there, Jeremy. Not unless you bring them there. And really, there's no segues in high fantasy unless your game has them. In which case, that sounds
Your
like
game
a
is awesome.
Yeah.
All right, you gotta. If you're gonna scream, you're gonna be on TV. All right.
Data's camera shy. He's looking away.
It's all right. He'll look over in a second.
So as we begin getting into the topic in the moment's time, where we'll be discussing, like Jeremy said, downtime at sea. Chime up, chime in, chime up and in. Chime in both directions. If you have any thoughts or questions, or want to contribute to the discussion, and we'll be looking at chat. Also, if you have questions for our segment Ask Pete and Jeremy, which we do at the end of each episode, please post those in our Discord server, which is linked below under the Ask Pete and Jeremy's Discord channel.
And you can ask us all sorts of questions. It can be DM advice, it can be personal questions, it can be whatever. We reserve the right not to answer them if they're rude or offensive, or if we just can't answer them.
Yes.
But without further ado, let's jump into the topic. So, Pete, we're going to be talking about downtime at sea. I mentioned that before. How to navigate the choppy waters of both keeping your players engaged and busy while also handling that kind of long-term, we're traveling for long periods of time aspect of a naval campaign. This is kind of a continuation of our nautical discussion that we had last week, featuring Maddie Morgs and Farfel. And yeah,
this Morgs in chat.
Yeah, shout out to Maddie Morgs and Farfel in chat.
Farfel here too. Great.
Indeed. And yeah, this is all just kind of a lead up to the upcoming release of the Ghosts of Saltmarsh, which is actually, I believe, releasing this month. It's a cool kind of adventure compendium akin to Tales from the Yawning Portal, if you're familiar with that book. But with more of a through line between the adventures. You can play them as one big thing or as individual things.
Great design.
I'm actually really excited. I really like that design of campaign modules. I really, really enjoy it. Like Prince of the Apocalypse does that too, where it's super modular, and I really like that. It means that the DM I can just plunder things from it.
It also is really effective, I think, for a seafaring story to have a more modular story.
Well, talking about plunder, I'm not talking about Mr. Plunder. We're talking about naval stuff.
Yeah. And we're going to be talking about downtime activities in the context of seafaring campaigns. But before we kind of go deep on the more seafaring downtime activities, let's just talk a little bit about how to run downtime activities in general, because we're talking about, when we use that term, there are a lot of things that are downtime activities. Things like shopping, planning, speaking to NPCs, and going around and kind of doing your legwork to put your next adventure together. Because in the broad sense, downtime activities mean, the things that you do in between adventures. But we're talking about something that's a little bit more, I think, specific than that.
Yeah, because in the case of naval adventures, it can also constitute traveling to adventures to a large degree.
Yeah.
Given that the sea can be kind of wank. But let's talk about regular old kind of stuff in regular conditions, right? Your normal run of the mill downtime. Players can be very involved or it can be very hands off. Anything from if players have, for example, tool proficiencies, um, supplies like herbalist supply, or I think it's still herbalist tools, alchemist supplies, and the like. They can craft some items. Maybe they can learn a trade or a language. Um, they can do other training for like maybe skill proficiencies. They can do work to earn some money. They can go carousing and meeting NPCs and gaining renown. All of these are kind of like the standard kind of downtime activities, and
Yeah.
all of them you can find in a lot of detail in Xanathar's Guide to Everything.
I think there's also resources in the DM's guide for them, and if you just look around for ideas about what to do for downtime activities and how to run them, I'm sure I think everyone has their own kind of twists and ideas about it. I'm sure you can find a ton of other great resources from good DMs online as well. And using those kind of like Xanathar's Guide to Everything general guidelines for downtime activities is actually a really great place to start because
Great jumping off point.
yeah, it gives you a right way to scale them because you don't want, for example, like, oh, I used my downtime to craft, I use my downtime to party. All right, I got a +1 sword, what do you have? A hangover. You have to find some kind of like you have to find some kind of ways to make it feel like all of them pan out equally by spending time into it. And that's kind of one of the tricks of making downtime activities fun. And usually, like I was saying before, these downtime activities, we're not talking about things like shopping, because that's stuff that you're going to role play out and actually like interact with shopkeepers. We're talking about things that are kind of you're intentionally having the players say they're going to do one thing for kind of a longer period of time in
Yeah.
order to, you want to essentially hand wave a chunk of the in-game time, saying like there's a couple weeks going by, what general task are you doing? I know you might have some specific errands you want to go on, but what like main thing you're going to devote that time through? And those are the kind of downtime activities we're going to be covering, I think, a lot here.
Yeah, and so going forward in this, when we do say downtime, we're not talking about going and having a deep conversation with an NPC and doing a little side quest on your own. That's
Yeah,
not what we're talking about.
that's a
We're
cool
very
thing to
much
do,
talking about
but
the hand wave.
yeah.
So, what, Pete, makes this kind of stuff fun then?
That's a really great question, Jeremy. I'm glad that you asked it. And the answer is I think it's just fun. That's me personally. It feels like you're getting a lot out of very little dice. Like as a player, your kind of value over dice roll is extremely high because you roll, oh, I rolled a 23. Wow, I just got proficiency in a language because I studied with this individual for 5 months. So in that regard, I just think it's really fun to do downtime activities. But I can get where a lot of people would find it boring because you are just kind of talking about doing more mundane things. You're not slaying monsters. You're not killing goblins. You're just sitting around and doing an honest day's work for a couple of weeks. Like it doesn't sound like D&D. It doesn't sound like adventure. So I think it's, rather than it being fun on its own, which again I enjoy it, I think you gotta, as a GM, find ways to make it feel fun for the players who don't see that in it.
Absolutely, and one of the best ways to do that is to have a very fine grasp on the tempo, right? That little tempo knob, how quick, how exciting, how active the process is. And a great way to do that, right, is to, it's supposed to hand wave a lot of time. Well, you can stop and you can take a little vignette, take a little, one little scene from this downtime activity and play it out. And maybe it's just a 5-minute role playing like conversation, right? About, let's say we'll stick to that languages thing that Pete was saying. Oh, I rolled a high number on my die and I learned a language. Awesome. Well, maybe there's a brief moment, right, where you're on the ship, right, and we jump into this little vignette where your character's trying to learn a language and makes a buffoon out of themselves, right, or embarrasses someone in the crew, or whatever, or embarrasses themselves to everyone. And we jump into that little vignette to emphasize an important part of the process, right? This was a thing and it was happening in the setting. The same thing might be like for if you're doing honest work, how that might play out. Maybe we take a moment into the life of Tack from Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and it's just a shitty morning of Tack bartending or waiting or something like that, or a really great one. But taking a moment to look at those helps to validate it a lot more, and it can help to break up the, all right, a lot of time has passed, roll a die, into something a little bit more substantial.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side, for players that don't enjoy that kind of thing, then you can go even deeper on the hand wave. You can just say, all right, roll a dice. You roll one dice because players are kind of getting bored with even the vignettes. All right, this is what happened during your downtime. They don't have time to get bored. You move on. You just kind of say, this is what you did. You got this for it. That's going to be satisfying for the player. Like there's something that they received as a result of spending the time on it, which is the other kind of major way to make downtime interesting, is within what the consequences of the downtime were. And then you move on if players aren't into it.
Yeah, and I actually really like comment in chat from Game Master Vault. My player characters had to go for 3 days without any. My players' characters had to go for 3 days without any rest. I keep hoping. I have no idea what this downtime you speak of is.
I keep them hopping.
Yeah. I'll keep them hopping. Sorry.
No
Well, Game Master's Vault. That happens a lot too. Downtime is not in every game. Not every player really cares. There's a reason that these tool proficiencies and these downtime activities are things that we mentioned are from an expansion. They're from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. I mean, obviously they've been a concept for as long as D&D's existed, but they were only added to 5e after the fact. You don't have to do any of this. It's just something that a lot of players, especially those that are tend to be very invested in their RP, or actually a lot of the time, a lot of the power players too will want to get good mechanical benefits out of their, I don't know, basket weaving proficiency, for example.
The classic.
And like different players like it for different reasons, and some just don't care. And if they don't care, awesome. You hand wave the whole travel. Yeah, a couple weeks pass, you're on a ship, you do ship stuff, and you're in the new place. So, yeah, it works both ways. But Pete was mentioning something really great, right? Where we're talking about these little vignettes, and if they don't really engage the players, how to continue to make things more interesting. You can either just dial back and roll dice, or there can be more real consequences, more like serious consequences. In Xanathar's Guide, they refer to them as complications, and it says that you roll for them, but like you can just do them. You don't have to. The rules in that book are a jumping off point. They're guidelines. And if following those rules isn't fun, then don't. Spice them up. Just change it. Say, yeah, there's a complication because it's more fun if there's a complication right now.
And what some of those complications can be is, the rules as written in Xanathar's, they have like lists of tables for things that can go wrong in every downtime activity you do. For example, if you're out doing an honest day's work, there's a possibility that you end up with an angry customer that has kind of built up a personal grudge now against you in particular. And that's just one example, which creates, this kind of sense of danger when they're rolling the dice. It adds a little bit of drama to these downtime activity rolls because, like, oh, well, there's a chance that something goes actually bad and it means something if I roll poorly on it, other than it just meaning I don't make a little bit of extra money. Adding those stakes is just more fun. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in Waterdeep Dragon Heist, if you've been keeping up with it, the whole deal with the player characters and Emic Froon, that was just a complication with starting a business.
Yeah.
It was just a little bit more flushed out than a sentence on a table. The problem, and Pete mentioned this really clearly and like really hit the nail on the head, is in a lot of these example complications, they are a random or an unknown person starts a thing. And being on the sea can make that complicated because you know everyone. You know everyone on the ship. There's not a random no-name person that can be your complication, at least not as easily. Complications tend to be a little more, well, you got to play off a little bit more than just, you can't just put a random element in there every time. And
For
a
sure.
couple ways to, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, you can finish your thought, Jeremy. I was just
No, I
agreeing
was
with you.
just going to say, one of the things you can play off when you're on the sea is your surrounding.
Yeah,
So
because
yeah,
when you're in the city, sorry, when you're in the city, your surroundings, and I say the city because I'm playing in Waterdeep right now with Jeremy, so I'm very used to having all of these, tools for downtime activities. But just when you're on land and in the world, it's really easy to have access to everything that you want to have access to. You have your forge if you're a blacksmith. You don't have a forge on your wooden boat, odds are.
No.
So a lot of the tool proficiencies that would be a fallback just aren't going to be available. Like Jeremy was saying, the same thing with individuals and kind of creating these complications, and kind of having these surroundings is going to make things very kind of complicated. In the same regard, there's also just way more downtime too. There's this problem of how often you're at downtime, because a seafaring campaign, I mean, you're spending a lot of time on the sea. Traveling between point to point is probably, like, at least in terms of downtime, that's what the vast majority of your campaign is going to be. I'm sorry, at least in terms of in-game time.
Canonical time.
Yes, thank you. Well put. So yeah, you got to kind of figure out ways to get around both of these kind of issues, because I think those are probably the two primary ones: is that you're constantly technically at downtime, and that there's just not a lot of access.
Well, and to add on to that, right? You're right. You're constantly at downtime, and canonically, in terms of the game's canonical timeline, the majority, right, of your time is downtime. Man, that's not fun. Like, I mean, it can be. Some people will like that, but I feel 95% of parties won't want to spend 95% of their time figuring out what happens during their downtime. The game session for most people doesn't need to reflect what's actually happening proportionally to the time in game. So you got to make sure not to let things dwell. And I've run into that problem in the past.
I think it's funny you say that, just because I personally enjoy that so very much, and I was just thinking about how much I would love taking all of that time.
95%
Yes,
of the parties
I
you play
realize
with,
I'm a rare minority.
5% of your parties are going to say, like, man, I would love a game that was just downtime.
I would have
And then we
run.
fight things every once in a while.
Yeah, I would have run Waterdeep Dragon Heist as just, once we opened the tavern, that was the end of the campaign, and we just managed the tavern.
I mean, it could have been.
It could have been. No, it's fun to go out on mysteries and stuff. Sorry, I have distracted.
Yeah. So how do we overcome, right, the issue of our surroundings in this regard? How do we overcome the fact that, all right, you don't have a forge, so it's hard to smith, or you don't have a place to stop and resupply for your papers and inks for your calligraphy, or you don't have a teacher to teach you Undercommon, for example. Pete, how do you do that?
I think it's very simple. Very simple answer. You bring the surroundings to the ship.
Beautiful. It's a wrap. We're done.
We're done.
We're done, folks. See you later. I'm gone.
But for those of you that are still hanging out, even though Jeremy has now left, what we mean by bring the surroundings to the ship is you take all of the things that you think your players are going to want to engage with in downtime, and you make sure that they have access to those resources on the ship. And you think about downtime, and I think in a much more granular sense. For example, let's say you have a wizard who usually, like, if he was in a city, he would be spending his time in a library studying. You just give him one very big book somewhere, and over the course of like several downtimes, you can say, all right, you delve deeper into this old tome, and here's what you're able to glean from it, as one kind of primary example. You can find ways for players to engage. Perhaps they don't have the ability to use a full forge, but give them some way to like craft things beyond that. Maybe they have the ability, they find some weapons in the world and in their adventures that they're able to repair. So even though they're not necessarily building things from scratch, they can do some of these activities on the boat. If there's people that you want to get involved, have some strangers ask for patches on the ship so that you have those as a resource if you want them.
Yeah, and there's a great comment in here from Game Master's Wall. I should just shave my head. I'm sorry, that wasn't the comment I meant. What I meant is kidnap a few mentors for the skills you want to acquire. Absolutely. I think one of the best things about these kind of downtime activities is when you're laying these seeds, you can be more overt or less overt. So if players find an ancient tome, right, on their adventure, they might not immediately think, all right, this tome is how I'm going to learn to spell plane shift, right? Or how I'm going to discover lore about research lore about the plane of Arcadia, right? They don't think about that kind of stuff. They just say, oh, it's an old tome, and you say it's worth a lot of money when they get it, and that throws them off. And then later on, they figure it out while they're out there. Likewise, you fight pirates, you capture one or two of them, they're just sitting in the brig, and then, they know Elven. I want to learn Elven. Huh. And that now has become more than just a tool. It's also an interesting little puzzle for them to solve that's a little more interactive. It's kind of, we're not talking about how to engage players. This is a sort of complication. You have a teacher, the teacher is your prisoner, right? We're adding this neat complication to make the downtime a little more exciting. And you don't have to limit yourself to what is in the player's handbook or the dungeon master's guide or Xanathar's guide. Yeah, absolutely. I would highly recommend against that, limiting yourself to those books and what's in them. But like Pete was mentioning a tome that you could learn something from, right? You can delve into and learn information from. Awesome. That's not in any book. I guess technically it's in Tomb of Annihilation as well as Guide to Monsters, but that's not the point. It's that kind of thing is something Pete made up. A great magic item that a player in DnDTime, the Forgotten One, came up with is the Magic Star Furnace, which is it's a miniature furnace, right, that can harness the power of a star and kind of use it in small areas. And it has some other cool active abilities as like a magical implement, but a tiny magical furnace that has a portal to the surface of a star that can be used to superheat small pieces of metal for forging. That's radical. That's fucking badass. And I'll tell you, your Smith character is going to really like that shit. I'll tell you, I mean, if that were me and I was playing me old dwarven Smith, like, oh, yep, no, forged from the heat of a star, you know. This is some true dwarven craft. Really play into it. And coming up with those unique and engaging little breadcrumbs to give to your players, you're opening the door for them to do whatever they want, for them to run along with it. And if they don't pick up on it, they don't pick up on the trail, you can nudge them a little bit. Maybe you mention, for example, the prisoners know Elvish, and the players want to learn Elvish. And the players never think to question the prisoners. They're just going to dump them off at the next port because they're lawful neutral, and they're going to return them to the cops because they're weird. And you know, none of the players think about it, and they're traveling like, man, I wish we could learn Elven. You can just not so subtly have one of the crew members, you know, in one of those little vignettes you take, have one of the crew members complaining about how the prisoners were cursing at them in some bizarre language, or something like that, right? There's an interesting way to spice that up. Hell, you can have just the crew be teachers and mentors and things, and that's a really cool way to get the players more invested in specific crew members, which we're probably going to talk. That's a whole episode, is the crew, I think.
I like the idea of using those vignettes as extra, like, because that's another way to make the players feel engaged with downtime, is if you're doing these little kind of vignettes to, you know, show off the whatever minor activity that they're doing, having those also as ways to like pull in, you know, RP and engage them more in the plot and create plot hooks and pull them into the world, will start to make it feel less like, yes, this is my downtime vignette, and more just, I'm continuing to play D&D and adventure. And if the downtime feels like it's incorporated in part of the evolving story and the adventure, that's fun. That's that's the
That's the
juice of
goal.
downtime. Yeah.
That's the ultimate goal, is just make it
absolutely
work. Make it part of the game, not the secondary weird second game.
And of course, easier said than done.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you could tell right away from the first little bit of downtime in Dragon Heist, the first one, it was hard. I wasn't quite ready. I think the second time around it went a little better, but the first time it was definitely a little like,
I don't know.
I was a little uncomfortable. I was trying to
jarring maybe
integrate,
but I did still enjoy it.
And you love downtime. You're just a downtime fanatic.
I'm just a downtime fanatic. As again,
just
a side note, one of the longest running campaigns we talked about at one time on Talks, that game was just Downtime the game. We'd spend like 5-hour sessions micromanaging a town that we all ran. And no one ever got bored of that. We could have just done that for a full campaign.
I mean, you did. There was some combat at the end, kind of.
But in that regard, one of the things, and this is probably true for all downtime, but it applies, of course, to nautical downtime as well. Another way to make downtime feel interesting is by incorporating choice. And when I say choice, I mean, it's very obvious. For one thing, I mean, they're choosing downtime. They're choosing what their activity that they're going to do is, which is in of itself a choice. But if you're going into these vignettes and making it a little bit more complicated, having what they do in those vignettes actually have an impact on what happens in said downtime. Give them, if they're doing smithing and forgery, give them options of like, that they're trying to make an axe, but like present them with multiple metals, which is, I mean, a very kind of binary and like, well, here you are actually just making a choice. And I think there's probably subtler ways to do that as well. But just this act of getting to pick like, all right, I want to choose what metal I am going to forge with, and think about what the consequences are going to be for the weapon. Maybe if you pick one weapon, it might be a little bit harder forged, but it's also a little bit more brittle, or vice versa. By using this option, whatever you kind of build in your smith forge is going to be, maybe a little bit more versatile, but won't be hard enough to pierce certain armors. And in terms of like mechanically, you have to figure out what that means mechanically in the long run. But it makes the player feel a little bit more invested in and kind of engaged in the downtime by, they feel more like their character. They're doing the thing that their character is doing.
Yeah, and super, like, even in a non-magical game, something like a weapon that does an extra 1 damage because it's very sharp, or it has a +1 to hit if you spend your short rest sharpening it, right? Like, because it's made out of this special super sharp metal that just needs to be sharpened frequently, right? Like, you can do that. That's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not breaking any laws of D&D. You're not violating the sanctity of the game. If anything, you're just making it more interesting and exciting for that player, which is what it's all about. D&D is a set of guidelines. It's a set of, here are ways you can play the game. Go wild. Do what you want with them. Make them your own. Make them what's right for you and your players. But speaking of guidelines, there is something else I wanted to talk about when we're talking about this downtime. And unless, Pete, are you good to move on?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what I was going to talk about specifically is pacing of your overland travel. So I'm trying to. So, for example, let's think of how long, right, it takes to do some of these downtime activities. Some of them are just not even really feasible. Like, how are you going to buy a magic item on the middle of the ocean? You're probably not.
Yeah.
But you could totally
carouse, probably.
But you could totally extrapolate the buy a magic item, especially if your characters are higher level. Which you're higher level if you're doing the buy a magic item option anyway. Yeah. Maybe you just say, you spend your downtime using detect magic or whatever, channeling it through some dumb bullshit thing on the ship to search the ocean floor for magic items. And that's what it is. Something pops up on your radar over the downtime.
I love the spirit behind channel it through some dumb bullshit magic thing on the ship, which sounds like a joke, but that's good. 100%. That's a really good idea. That's a really good DMing. You just like, yeah, you have this thing. It works the way you want it to. That's totally fine. Do that if it makes the game more fun and interesting.
Yeah, maybe it's the figurehead of your ship, right? Maybe your ship has a really sick metal mast that works like a lightning rod.
Radical.
And, you know, there's a million different silly things you could... I really like Roger Twice's examples. Scrape barnacles off the hull. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If a player's told me they wanted to do that, I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. And your ship is going to travel faster because of it. I just make up some dumb thing. But sorry, I got distracted by buy a magic item.
Pacing.
Pacing. So if we look at, I'm trying to find learn a language. And I think it's under training, maybe. But it takes a number of weeks equal to, yeah, okay. So it takes 10 work weeks, reduced by a number of work weeks equal to your intelligence modifier. Intelligence penalties don't increase the time needed, thank God. And it costs money per week, right? Now, if you look at how long your ship travel is, right? How long is ordinary ship travel? Do you know off the top of your head, Pete?
It would be, I mean, ordinary, wouldn't it be just based on the distance they have to go?
Data? I have no idea. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. If you're going to be planning a campaign like this and you want to include downtime, I'm sorry, if you're playing a naval-based campaign and there's any chance you're going to entertain downtime, think about it a little bit. Think about how long the guidelines give you for accomplishing these activities, and think about what how fast you're going to be traveling in it. Because if your islands are a day apart, there's never going to be downtime.
Yeah.
Or there's going to be actually infrequent downtime. If the islands are weeks and weeks apart, or if you're traveling over the, Pacific Ocean equivalent in your world, I mean, how the hell long is that going to take? It's going to take forever. I'm going to learn like 6 languages,
Mm-hmm.
A reasonable intelligence modifier, a couple months of travel, and yeah, I've learned like 3 languages and that's a huge amount. And with languages, that's not a big deal, but with something maybe more
skills, for example.
Skills, right, are very, very mechanically applicable. And for players to just be able to be like, yeah, I just get every skill because we hire a person to come on the ship and there's so much downtime. And another way to handle that kind of stuff, right, is instead of taking it as work weeks, what I would probably do is I'd take it as length of voyages, right? Be like a long voyage, a medium voyage, a short voyage. And you can do 1 downtime activity over a short voyage, 2 over a medium, and 3 over, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's 1, 3, and 5, or something like that.
And in the same regard, I think keeping downtime in a
Matty Moore is absolutely correct. I'm sorry, Pete.
Oh no, go ahead.
You learn the languages, but it's all the bad words.
Well, I mean, you're at sea, of course.
You're a sailor. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I lost my point. No.
Oh, Sheba's answered. A common common voyage is a full year. Thank you, Sheba.
Okay, what I was getting at before was, as a DM, I think it's probably relatively healthy, and it depends on your party. But especially if you're playing with a party that is going to be a little bit more gamey, if you keep your downtime a bit more abstract, for you to understand exactly mechanically what's happening is great. But I wouldn't necessarily put Jeremy trusts the boys in Waterdeep, so he just gave us the downtime activities and let us look it over. But I wouldn't necessarily within most groups, I think, say here's exactly what downtime is. You can get skills, for example, if you wait a year, because I think adds a little bit of, I think it's almost a touch less fun for some players if it's understood. But instead, if it just feels more natural, it's just like, oh, while you're on the trip, you're also learning a language. That feels more natural and more just kind of like, immersive than necessarily I do the learn a language function from the list of options we were given.
Absolutely. And I'm actually looking at so I quickly did a little bit of Google foo here. I'm on Wikipedia because I don't know very much about sailing. And I know the Dungeon Master's Guide has some options, but I'm looking here at Christopher Columbus. And I mean, I'm familiar with Christopher Columbus. He sailed from Spain down to basically Central America, the Bahamas, Caribbean area, and quote unquote discovered America. Well, thanks, Europe. But 29 days is what it's saying here. And maybe I just pulled a random point here.
Wait, what?
But that's maybe I'm totally wrong. 29 days does not sound like the correct
29 days to cross the Atlantic?
Yeah, that can't be right.
That sounds really quick, actually.
Yeah, that can't be correct. Chat, do you have me beat here? Do you know how many days it was? Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out, but it's the kind of thing where you can look at that kind of stuff and figure out like based on your world how far things are going to actually be.
I'm looking it up here. In the it took a couple of months.
Okay, so a couple months.
And by the 1700s, 6 weeks was what it would be to make the crossing of the Atlantic.
That's still much easier. 6 weeks, couple months. Keep that stuff in mind and know that coming into your game how you want to handle that, because once you've let a player do something, taking it away sucks. It's a bad feel. You don't want the players to go on their first expedition and be able to get a bunch of languages, and they're like, oh yeah, I got 3 languages, awesome. And then you're like, man, they're going to know
languages.
And then you're like, man, they're going to know everything. They can't do that. And you change the rules on them. And then they're like, oh, wow. So the first time I got a bunch of I could have gotten like skills and I got stupid languages. And now I can't get those skills you got to plan a little bit. A little bit of that prep work is a big deal. Yeah. And yes, chat, ships are way faster than I thought as well.
I'm in the exact same boat, 100%. I thought that was a voyage of like half a year was what I always imagined it took Christopher Columbus. Like maybe even longer. Yeah, I don't know.
Keep that in mind. Crossing the Atlantic, 6 to 8 weeks.
That's a good frame of reference. So
your travel shouldn't be that freakishly long.
And originally when we were talking about this, we kind of introduced as another problem for this is that it's happening all the time. So if you're using downtime rules, it's every time they're going to a new location, odds are there's downtime in between, because every new location they're going to requires this long bit of travel in order to get there, be it 4 or 5 days or the full 6 weeks to cross the Atlantic. And how do you deal with that? And the answer, I think, is have some downtime activities that are very renewable resources. And things like, for example, learning languages, I would say that that's not renewable, because you don't want your players to be doing that every single time, because that's not really like sustainable for a long-term game. Renewable activities would be things like, and I think this is a great way to make these feel significant, is roles on a ship. Have players that are have specific jobs that they have to do. The navigator, the cook, the shipwright, who make sure that the ship is in good shape, and give consequences. And
they poor have motherfucker who scrapes the barnacles off the sides.
Yeah, the swabby, whatever the particular role is for that player, make their actions and them doing what is their job, their quote unquote job on the ship, feel impactful. The cook, you prevent diseases and things like that, but maybe if you're cooking well, it also gives some kind of boon to players on the ship. They're extra healthy because the cook's doing such a good job. The navigator makes a mistake, oh no, now you're on an island. Now you're on an unknown island, which is one, a great setup for an adventure, and two, it's just kind of like fun and interesting. In the same regard, the navigator does really well, and they discover some new path or some new kind of currents to make your future trips more efficient, or they find a new location, or decipher a map that leads to buried treasure. Regardless of what it is, there's definitely ways to make like ship rolls on a ship feel really impactful and also reusable, which is I think really important.
Yeah, and I think that's the name of the game. There is reusable. You want players to be able to do things that they can reliably do, because no matter how long you play these kind of games, I feel like eventually you get a little tired of downtime. Maybe that's not true for everyone, but I know for me, there's definitely a time at the end where, okay, we've had enough downtime. We've been doing this for like 5 levels. We can just skip past it. And having just something they can say, I do this, that they know they can fall back on, rely on, is a good thing just to have. Especially when players, if you have a player who's maybe not super like feeling it, maybe they're not feeling well, maybe they're just tired and they got other stuff going on and they can't really focus. Um, Having something easy as an easy always there option is very good.
Agreed.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah. So I think more or less we're kind of wrapping up the downtime discussion here. Can you got anything else, Pete? Because I think that's just about it on downtime for me.
I think one more just great caveat to say to literally everything we've said so far is downtime rules are optional. You don't need to do this in any campaign. There are a lot of, I think most campaigns, you could cut downtime out and your players might not notice. Unless there are players that you know are really into downtime, but this is completely optional. And if this isn't for you or for your campaign, you do not need to feel like you need this in your game. Some players think it's fun, myself included, and I know a lot of people that also feel the same way, but you can hand wave downtime by saying, maybe you run a couple random encounters in your oversea travel, or overland travel, whatever the case may be, and then your players
are there.
Yep, not important, but fun if you're into it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a time and place for everything, but the biggest and most important thing is, like Pete was saying, it's not for everyone, and sometimes different players in the party will have different preferences. So just make sure you're not over committing to one player, and you're not leaving the rest of the party out to dry. If one player really likes downtime, make sure they get it, but don't do it excessively and spite everyone else who might not like it. So just keep that stuff in mind. That's kind of out of the context of downtime and more on the paying attention to your players aspect of DMing. But yeah, I think that just about wraps it for downtime. Thank you all for hanging out, for chatting with us this evening. I really liked a lot of the chat today. I really think, especially in a naval campaign, focusing on that, like the naval specific stuff, like prisoners from a pirate ship that tried to board, like finding buried treasure right as a downtime activity, looking for signs on small atolls or whatever. Those are cool, those are neat, those are awesome. Stick to those, or at least emphasize those, because that's stuff that you can only do with a naval campaign, which is why you're playing a naval campaign, is to get that side of the game. So yeah, pretty good. Now, before we wrap up for the evening, we do have one last thing that we do here every week on the DnDTime Talks, which is Ask Pete and Jeremy. It's a segment we do at the end where you all ask us whatever question you damn well please. You got to hop onto our Discord channel. You can find links below, or just ask the bot in chat by typing !Discord. And yeah, hop down to the Ask Pete and Jeremy channel and ask us a question or two. And yeah, we'll do our best to answer.
Let's read our first one right here from Bionic Shiva. This is a question I really like. If you didn't stick to, If you didn't stick to classical and didn't have to deal with copyright, what kind of music would you like to add more into D&D time?
See, this is actually an interesting question. Do you want to hit this first, Pete? Because I think we might have similar answers, but you can go first. If you're ready.
There's my answer is very broad, I think, and that is there's so many different things I would like to put in, and I would like to because when I choose music, I like to choose music that suits the genre or the mood, and our genre is constantly fluctuating in the land of D&D time. Like when we were in the frontier, you would be hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly soundtrack constantly. If we were in Central City, I'd be playing a lot of like jazz pieces. Like I've always wanted to be able to put Rhapsody in Blue in, but that is not in the public domain, and there's no public domain
Yeah.
recordings, so I can't yet. It's soon. It's on the horizon.
Yeah, it's like what, next year? Year after?
Yeah, I'm sure that there are adventures that are like more up tempo where I'd be playing some like heavy electronic music in the background, like Sokotoan adventures with all like the tech and stuff. I'd be doing in almost an EDM background, so it'd be wildly varied.
That's interesting. 'Cause I think my answer's a little different, and that is just more better classical music.
That's also true.
Like,
oh, we could just take the London
I
Symphony
can
Orchestra
do whatever
exclusive.
I want. Oh my goodness! Like,
If you could just use all the London Symphony Orchestra recordings.
I mean, yeah, like really great recordings of the planets would be just excellent. I mean,
That's a
we've got
great
pretty
point.
okay ones, but
That's
I
a great
mean,
point.
Oh Fortuna would be just an excellent. We've been wanting that piece for a long time. A great recording of Dies Irae from Mozart's what is it?
Oh,
626.
we used the
426?
1812 overture recently. There are some beautiful 1812 overtures.
Oh yeah.
That one's not bad, but there are some like really glorious ones. Um,
Yeah, no, I
Great
mean
question.
that would be my vibe. Is just more excellent classical music without
Better
a fear in the
classical.
world. I think that about wraps that. I mean, what other music?
Yeah.
I mean, like Pete was saying, I'm also partial to jazz, so I'd probably use a lot more jazz.
Yeah, same.
Matty Morris asks, have you played and or run for any memorable sorcerers or wizards in all your days? Oh my god, in all of them? Uh-oh. And what made them stand out? It's an interesting question. Because I think, in a way, what is, right, a sorcerer or a wizard?
Your caster. Your quintessential
Yeah, but
caster.
are we talking about like flavor like that? Because, like, for example, in the Crucible, which is a game I ran with Pete and them, your character Pete was though psionic in nature, right?
Essentially a wizard.
Did magic.
Yeah.
And I loved that character. That character was excellent.
Oh, thank you.
What made them stand out? Oh, geez. I mean, just the personality of the character. It was a very interesting and fun character. The kind of you never were totally sure if they were a bad guy, but they were, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, they were for a while, but
Well, but the thing is, right? You were a bad guy. You did bad things to people that you didn't like, and you protected the people you did. So it's like that weird, like protective, but kind of evil. I don't know. It was it felt like a very real character, I guess, in that regard. In terms of like a character that had psionic like influencing and influence magic, like charms and stuff.
I, for one, have not run for or run that many wizards and sorcerers. I like Torfless Fromla Duke.
Did you really like Torfless Fromla?
I've actually always
I loved Torfless Fromla Duke.
As one of Jeremy's characters. He was just an illusionary wizard. I just liked the core premise of it, and it was like he knew that illusions were a terrible school of magic, but he banked on like, when I get good enough, I'm going to make illusions real, and then I'll be the most powerful wizard of all time. And I really liked that mindset of him like planning for his future that far in advance, and like having this weird ambition to hit quote unquote 14th level, because it takes a lot of commitment.
It was also the ambition that he was going to be the best dwarf wizard. He had no misconceptions. I'm not going to be the best wizard. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be the best dwarf wizard. I'm going to be the fucking best. No dwarf is going to out-wizard me.
And that's why he's the third most powerful wizard in the land of D&D time.
Exactly.
Yeah. While Ricochet asks...
Beat out by Bartholomew and a skeleton.
How do you handle evil characters and their interaction with good NPCs in a heroic storyline? Do you want to go first, or would you like me to?
I think there's a couple different ways of going about this. So you can take the first swing at it, Pete, because I think it really depends, right, on like the kind of evil character that person's playing.
Exactly. And my answer is I don't think I would. I think I would tell the player at the very beginning of the campaign, if they want to play an evil character, I'd say, hey, this is what the campaign is going to be like. Make sure that even if you're going to play an evil character, make a character that can be in this campaign and function and coincide with a party from the week to week, and then trust them to, just do that.
Yep.
And there are definitely ways to like incorporate, and I'll work with that player if they have like goals that are counter to what the party is trying to do. I'll work out a way for them to be kind of, moving the campaign in a direction while still functioning in the party. But for the most part, I would expect the player to kind of, cede a little bit to the greater goal of the people that they're playing with.
And I love that mention there, because I don't think this necessarily only applies to, it's almost always applied to evil characters in terms like people asking, but this also applies to a lot of different other, like
Chaotix.
How do you handle evil characters and their interactions with good NPCs in a heroic storyline? How do you handle chaotic characters and their interactions with good PCs in a storyline? How do you handle lawful good characters and their interactions with gray NPCs,
evil NPCs,
even gray, right? I've seen the tyrannical lawful good player, like that happens, and that just, it can feel really shitty to try and play with sometimes, right?
For sure.
And the same way that it can feel really shitty when the chaotic neutral player just, you walk into the tavern and he murders the barkeep. I say they murder the barkeep, it can be anyone. Or the evil character who tortures the, I don't know, adorable kobold you find. Whatever. Like, it works in any sort of direction. And like Pete was saying, having a good session zero, communicating effectively, and knowing and making sure that player understands that it's a group game and we're all in it to have fun is the real key. Yep. Anyone who's playing D&D solely for themselves and not for anyone else at their table is not going to be a good player.
Well said.
Ivalon, how do you handle evil characters? You don't. Exactly. You handle evil players. Sorry, go ahead, Pete. Oh, something's happening. Pete? All right, I think Pete's dead. Chat, I hope to God you can hear me all right. Oh, we're getting the F. We're all dead. Uh-oh. Discord. Why? All right, hopefully you guys can hear me now. Looks like we lost Pete entirely. Can you guys hear me? Chat? Chat, are you there? Chat? Okay, you guys can hear me, but Pete is toasty. Jeremy's good. All right, guys. Well, hopefully we get Pete back in a minute. Take your screenshots now. I don't know. I imagine what probably happened, something bad just happened to Pete. So we're gonna try and dead, not big surprise. All right. Well, I guess I'll just keep answering these questions. Just ask Jeremy now, guys. Mr. Plunderloot with the Rakshasa. I don't think that's a question, but I agree with it. Yes, is the answer. Excuse me, pardon me. I see Mr. Plunderloot. I'm sorry, not Mr. Plunderloot. Maddie Morgs. Actually, is there one that's just me? No, there's not. There's no just me's. So we're just gonna keep Frozen Pete here alongside me, just being Pete. And Maddie asks, thoughts on called shots when attacking? Have you ever played or presented a disabled but functional character or NPC in some way? I think this is 2 questions, I hope. Yeah, Pete's demonstrating downtime very well, Roger Twy. Selkirk froze him, Plunder. I hope not. Otherwise, he's never coming back. So I guess there's 2 questions there from Maddie. Called shots when attacking, and disabled but functional character or NPC in some way. Oh, I'm sorry. I did miss your question about Course Quest. We're going to get to that in a second. An evil player has stopped Pete. Oh, no! Called shots when attacking. I like called shots when attacking. I think, like, it's kind of tough to... because there's no rules for that in 5e. And it's really weird to kind of come up with precedents for those kinds of things, because there are issues, right? Because if you say, all right, you take a called shot, shoot them in the eye, and you hit, it will be a critical hit, just as an example. The problem with that is that sucks, right? Because now that rogue will always take a called shot to the eye every time. And that is rough. That's hard to deal with. A great kind of example I like to do when I'm handling something like that is maybe look at there's an injuries table actually in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's on page 272. And in it, you can find a couple of example injuries. And again, this table is guidelines. It's not required. So, for example, losing an eye. You have disadvantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on sight and on ranged attack rolls. Magic, such as regenerate, can restore a lost eye. If you have no eyes left after sustaining this injury, you are blinded. Okay, so maybe a called shot makes the character roll an injury check for that specific thing. That'd be a reason. And, you know, they give them other examples of when an injury might occur when you take a critical hit, blah, 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 blah. I don't really like those rules a ton, but I think maybe like a called shot to force an injury roll is a really cool way of handling that, especially if it's a serious disadvantage. If you're taking a -5 to, well, maybe, right, I can blind him. That's a cool gambit. And that might be something that, like, hey, maybe that's a feat you have to take, and you make a new house ruled feat for it. So I think that's how I'd probably, in an ideal situation, handle it. So that's that much. And then as to the second part of the question, have you ever played or presented a disabled but functional character or NPC in some way? Matty Vorgs, just bringing up woo-woo every time. We can't play a game without woo-woo. I love woo-woo. Woo-woo is my little no-armed kobold, and I love him very much. And yeah, I just try to be respectful of the fact that he doesn't have any arms. Obviously, the character not having arms is kind of meant as a little bit of a gag. But, you know, when I'm playing the character, I play the character as, you know, effective, as adapted to their situation, and as, you know, that's not what defines them. Despite, you know, that it is he doesn't have arms, and when he turns into a beast because he's a druid, the beasts don't have arms. But in all of the other interactions of the character, that's not what defines the character. What defines the character is how they act, how I play them, and in a few cases, how they overcome that deficiency, right? So the effective use of the kobold's tail, for example. That's a big defining feature that, you know, when I'm saying how woo-woo swings his stick of holly, that is his natural spellcasting implement, right? He wiggles his tail around, which the holly is tied to, or something like that. You know, I try not to dwell on specifically the disability, and I never poke fun at it. I don't try and like deliberately make fun of it, is I guess what I'm getting at. I try and, you know, be respectful to it. Wild Ricochet asks, what all instruments do you guys play, and how long did it take to learn them? Well, Pete plays a lot of instruments. I play very few now. Back in the day, I could play the trumpet or most brass instruments to some degree because they're all very similar, brass piston instruments. And I also played the piano. I'm very out of practice with both, but I still mostly have my chops are totally busted for the trumpet. But I don't know, just need some more time, need some more practice. I can get back into it. Took a long time. I mean, it's not a quick thing to learn any instrument, and I wasn't an expert, but I was all right. All right. Ivalon asks, oh, nope. Oh my goodness, one of your players had a character with gout, Ivalon? Oh gosh. Ivalon, how did you deal with that? Gout's bad. Going back to Wild Ricochet's question, what are your thoughts on Core's quest to hug all of the puppies and kittens? I don't know what you mean. I have no thoughts on that. Bartholomew sent him on a quest to hug every puppy and kitten in the land of D&D time. So, you know, it's what it is. Why Bartholomew sent him on that quest is, you know, I'm not Bartholomew, so I can't tell you. But while do you want to learn the piano so bad, it sounds amazing. It is. It's a lot of fun. You know, it kind of sucks to say, but if you want to learn the piano, I would recommend, I mean, I don't know any great examples top of my head, but you can get a pretty decent like MIDI keyboard for, I don't know, sub $100 probably, that is playable. Not great. It's not going to feel like a grand piano, but it'll be playable. And then because it's MIDI, you can hook it up to your computer and use whatever synthesizers you need. So that's what I would probably recommend. Something like that is a good intro that doesn't totally break the bank. I know when you're getting up there in the 80s or $90 category, that can be a lot for some folks, but you know, not a bad I mean, once you got it, right? Next question. Wild Ricochet asks, what is your guys' favorite D&D time adventure you've ever DM'd? And what's your favorite D&D story that you've ever been a part of? I don't think I have a quest. I don't know. I don't know. We don't really pick favorites on D&D time adventures. I love them all. I really do. There's something amazing to be learned, even from the, you know, our worst adventure. Actually, I think there's the most to be learned from our worst adventure. But I don't know. I really love D&D time. I think all the adventures are pretty good, and I can see by Pete's expression he agrees. So they're all pretty rad. And what's your favorite D&D story you've ever been a part of? I don't know. I haven't been a part of it yet. Ivalon. Oh, you gave him a reduced walking speed. We're talking about the gout now. We gave him a reduced walking speed and a house rule that once per session he had to scream, "Ow, my gout." Yeah, well, when it's something like gout that maybe is kind of more, I say extinct, but not as bad. It's not extinct as a disease or ailment, but not as common or as bad as certain other things. I don't know. That is kind of funny, but just got to make sure you're not being too offensive. Like, as Woo Woo the kobold, I'm not frequently wandering around being like, "Oh my, wish I had arms," because that would just be a little rude. But you know what? I dig it. Reflected 10-8 asks, what's your favorite damage type? I like thunder, I think. Wild Ricochet, last question is, do you guys have any intentions of ever implementing feats into D&D time? Well, Wild Ricochet, one of the things that you may have missed in the time since you've been away, in Legend tier, players can take feats if they want. And that's all. So I think I heard a question. I'm reading some stuff. Plunder, you're saying the first episode of D&D time, i.e. the pilot episode, perhaps? Oh, I see. What was the worst adventure? I mean, which one did you learn the most? I see the question. Yes, Biotic Shiba, you can take linguist. Oh boy. Yes, Wild Ricochet. It's very exciting. Taking a feat, you can multi-class. All sorts of crazy stuff. But yeah, what was the one we learned? I mean, all of like the very early adventures. There was a lot of learning about like pacing and how to run for totally random people every time, and all that kind of and coordinating the stream. And then there was like a great point, like a year or two ago, or a year ago maybe, where you're getting really good about pacing, and then we unlearned all that. Now we're terrible about pacing again. Um, I don't know. I mean, there's something to be learned on literally every episode we play, whether it's pacing, whether it's ways to engage and interact with our players more. Yeah, there's just a lot to learn, and it's always a lot of fun. I really love D&D Time. Pete really loves D&D Time, and we love you guys. So thank you so much. I think that's going to wrap us up for today. So any further questions we will answer next week on Ask Pete and Jeremy. And but yeah, so one last thing before we go, let's quickly give a quick thanks to everybody who's been hanging out. Thank you, chat. We love you guys for hanging out and for being part of this D&D Time community. And thank you additionally to Vassal Zeju for the subscription, 12 months in a row. That's a long fucking time. Mr. Plunder Loot subscribing with Twitch Prime or Amazon Prime for 14 months. It's a very long time. Now, Plunder, I hear with Amazon Prime, you can give one free subscription to whomever you wish on Twitch, and it costs you no more than you'd already be paying for Amazon Prime, which is amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. And anyone else, you can also do that. Thank you, Adrian P, for subscribing 13 months. Lucky 13. Amen to that. And thank you, Reflected 10-8, getting into the last second. Indang Big 15. Indang Bang 15. Thank you. Data also says thank you. Thank you guys. We appreciate all your support. We appreciate everyone just for hanging out. Really, you don't have to give us money and subscribe to be here. We love you guys just being here. Yeah, thanks, folks. Now we got one last thing. Mr. Matty Morgs, I see you in the chat. Matty Morgs also streams Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons related activities. And Matty's going to be streaming later tonight, probably in the next hour, I would guess. Matty, you can let us know exactly in the chat when you're going to be rolling. And it's going to be sick. So tune in, hang out. Matty, feel free to let everyone know in the chat what you're doing this evening. I'm not positive what it is, but I'll be there hanging out anyway. So tune in there. You can get him on twitch.tv/MattyMorgs, or we'll just be hosting him here, so you can just hang out and you'll automatically be moved over to the morgue zone. So, oh boy, we're not going to send you to the morgue. Oh boy. Anyway, 10 to 15 minutes. Hot damn. All right. Well, in that case, we'll see you all there. I am Jeremy, and he was Pete. And this is DnDTime Talks. Good night, everyone.